Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We are going to begin as we continue to let folks enter the room. We've got quite a number of nearly 500 folks registered, and so certainly expect several hundred coming in. And we will get started as soon as that participant number starts to slow down. All right, it looks like we've paused a bit, so I'll go ahead and get started. Tyler, we can go to the next slide. Welcome to the Recompete Pilot Program information section. My name is Chris Estes. I am co-director of the Aspen Institute's Community Strategies Group. We are a group that has been around for almost 40 years now, founded in 1985, that has focused the majority of our work on strengthening rural communities and Native nations, with that work really being centered on community economic development work. CSG acts as a hub in the field, really trying to connect practitioners and national, regional, and local organizations to one another to facilitate peer learning, share best practices, and bring those voices and learnings to policymakers to shape program implementation and design. We also have a history of working with community and regional foundations and national foundations to better understand what's needed in rural communities and how to gender greater support and investment in rural places. And we work across the whole spectrum of folks doing work in rural. We tend to think of rural prosperity as a bigger framework than just development, including things like education and health and the environmental sustainability issues. Go ahead to the next slide. So the Reimagining Rural Assistance Network is an informal coalition of national organizations and regional organizations and some practitioners who are really looking at this question, recognizing that rural communities need greater flexible long-term funding that will enable them to develop and implement more comprehensive community development strategies. This picture on the right was developed by our friends at the Brookings Institution to really shows the incredible complexity and confusion that it is trying to navigate federal funding for rural and tribal communities. We call it the spaghetti chart, but really showing how complicated where funding is, what different US governmental organizations administer that funding, and how it comes out of different pieces of legislation. So it is complex and often narrow. And so there has been this real gap of both flexible and comprehensive funding in rural. Next slide. So we have a general philosophy at CSG, and I think within the RRAN network of folks, we've sort of coalesced around a consensus towards recommendations to policymakers and agencies, centering our work about how do we support local ownership strategies in addition to whatever larger economic development work rural folks, rural communities and regions are doing, really focusing on investing in people and institutions, not just in attraction, increasing flexibility that align with both funding strategies and local needs, measuring and rewarding outcomes towards relative change and indicators of inclusion, cohesion, reductions in equity, and a number of things beyond just simply jobs created, dollars leveraged, and really finally thinking regionally. And a lot of this work you can find in CSG's Rural Development Hubs report that came out in 2019. So these themes will show up in our discussion of the Recompete program and with our discussion with practitioners. Next slide. So finally, many of you may know that Brookings and Aspen CSG did a comment letter to EDA's request for information on this program that we're going to talk more about. We had over 130 of you sign on to the letter. We made some key recommendations that I think we will continue to champion in our dialogue with federal agencies around some way to prioritize, particularly funding of cohorts of pilot communities in rural places to really provide that sort of technical assistance and outreach for lower capacity rural communities that often have trouble both doing the applications and competing for funding, federal funding, really allowing that the reason for that cohort to allow and create a learning agenda about what it takes to do this work in rural and how that learning can be recycled back into the design of programs, really pushing federal agencies towards this longer time frame rather than 1, 2, and 3 year cycles, which often are sort of part of the political cycle of both investing and reporting and budgeting, but still recognizing that work in rural has often much longer timeframes. And then finally, the key piece that we're going to talk a lot about today, enabling flexible use of funds to support the local capacity building organizational development, not just the community development goals. That often the investment in local organizations building a regional community development hub is really key to the community's ability to continue to draw down future funding, as well as kind of build consensus around priorities and strategies. So with that, to the next slide, I am going to turn it over to Annie, contractor, to take us through what we know about the EDA Recompete program.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate you giving that background. And just as a quick introduction, my name is Annie Contractor. I'm the Associate Government Affairs Manager at ruralorganizing.org Education Fund. And we are a network of over 100,000 activists and civic leaders in rural communities across the country who believe that progressive policy can really help make rural communities thrive. And so we work to advocate for policies that we believe will do this. And so that's one reason we're very excited to talk about the Recompete Pilot Program today. I thought I would start with this map, which the Economic Development Administration has recently released so that folks are able to explore and see if they are eligible for this program. We can probably share a link to this in the chat so that folks are able to explore if your community is eligible for the program. And you can see that there is quite a bit of eligibility across the country. I'm sure that our guest, Scott Andes from the Economic Development Administration, will talk about this in a little bit more depth later. But I wanted to just start with this as a grounding place as we talk about why this program is so important for rural communities. As we go on to the next slide, we can get a little bit more into the details of that. This opportunity is really perfect for rural communities for 3 key reasons. One, we know that there is a disproportionate relationship between rural communities and economic distress. The focus of this program on economic distress as a second reason is that it really can highlight some of the challenges that rural communities have faced when trying to pursue economic thriving. And the third reason that this program is such a great fit for rural communities is that flexible funding that Chris mentioned, and that will allow for locally designed solutions. So to walk through that a little bit more in detail, we already know that 8 in 10 persistent poverty communities are rural. And we also know that about 60% of the people who live in those persistent poverty counties are people of color. And so communities in rural America have really faced this persistent economic challenge, which makes them a great fit for a program that wants to alleviate that economic distress. And as we start to think about how a program like this can elevate rural communities and the challenges they face and the opportunities in front of them, It's great to point out that the vast majority of rural exclusive development assistance already out there comes in the form of loans, not grants. It's about 85% based on some numbers run by our friends at the Brookings Institution that rural exclusive assistance comes in the form of loans. And so having that mix be a little more balanced is really helpful. And the Recompete Pilot Program is a great opportunity for that. Looking at the map on the screen in front of you, you can see that this focus on areas where there is this economic distress is weighted toward rural communities. The map on your screen shows all of the coloration you see here are eligible areas based on the eligibility mapping tool that the Economic Development Administration released. And the areas in blue are those rural or those non-metro counties. So you can see that there is a lot of space in the continental U.S. that is rural that are eligible for this funding. And we also see that the eligibility, which is defined by Congress, was really intended to target those economically distressed places based on what is called the prime age employment gap, which gets a little bit technical, but it's really meant to capture those places where there is a gap in employment. And you see that folks have particular types of barriers to employment. And then the final thing I'll mention about why this funding opportunity really elevates what is the reality for a lot of rural communities is that EDA has 7 funding priorities. They start with equity, resilience for places that are facing things like energy transitions and workforce development. And this program is designed to really provide funding to help communities design those locally led solutions that are going to meet those funding priorities. That flexibility is a perfect fit for diverse rural communities and the diversity of the economic impacts that they're facing. So I'll stop there. I'm delighted to hear more from our guest, Mr. Scott Andes from the Economic Development Administration, who is going to, I'm hoping, dig into the details of what this funding opportunity looks like. I can share a little bit about him. Mr. Andes leads the Build Back Better Regional Challenge, which is a $1 billion regional economic development competition in the Economic Development Administration. On September 2nd, President Biden announced the 21 regional winners of the program. Prior to EDA, Scott was the executive director of the Block Center for Technology and Society at Carnegie Mellon University, a research center that applies artificial intelligence to address societal changes. He created and ran a new program at the National League of Cities that partnered with over 100 mayors to create local entrepreneurship policies and programs. Scott was a fellow at the Brookings Institution and the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, where he published over 100 research reports and articles on innovation-based economic development. Scott served as special assistant to Senator Chuck Schumer at the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, and he worked on numerous national political campaigns. He has degrees from the London School of Economics and Carnegie Mellon University, and lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Sasha, and son, Max. Welcome, and thanks for joining us, Scott. We're glad to have you here. I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Annie, so much. And I will share my screen, and we can kick off the presentation. So for folks who haven't seen, fortuitously, we put out our notice of funding opportunity about an hour ago before this event. So this is actually our first sort of public event to talk about the program. So we could drop in the chat and send around to folks the NOFO. We're thrilled to kick off this competition. As Chris and Annie and everyone has said, I think we're just really excited about the opportunity to have a program that specifically and exclusively targets the most distressed communities in the country. And so what I thought I'd do is I'd take in the next 10 or so minutes and really walk you through the program, walk you through what's in the NOFO, and walk you through like what we're trying to accomplish in the world. Like what is the sort of North Star of this program. So let me see if I can share screens. All right. Can somebody just give me a thumbs up if they can see my screen? Beautiful. All right. So I thought I'd do 3 quick things. I'll talk about the program vision, eligibility criteria, and then the program structure. So first, at the highest level, what is this program, this pilot program about? This program is a $200 million investment specifically to drive economic revitalization in some of the most distressed communities and regions in the country. As Annie said, we are targeting the prime age employment gap in these areas. But really what we're focusing on is creating economic hope and economic opportunity in places that have been forgotten for, some places that have been forgotten and underinvested in for too long. This will be a two-phase competition. We will provide both strategy development grants and then large flexible implementation awards. A little deeper on some of the principles for this program. First, this program is meant to make a discernible impact in the communities in which it serves. These are meant to be large awards. So on average, EDA's average award is about $2 million, as I'll illustrate. We're thinking about awards between the ranges of 20 and 50 million. So these are significantly sized awards. They are meant to really drive a discernible impact across, for the better part of a generation. We see this as a true place-based investment. And by that, what we really mean is that we genuinely believe that community leaders are best positioned to identify their own economic future and their own investment priorities. This is in my opinion, one of the most extraordinary flexible competitions in the entire federal government. We can do training, we can do infrastructure, we can do wraparound services, we could do drug rehabilitation. There really is very, very few limitations to these resources, and that is by design. We want communities to tell us what they need, and we want to be able to provide those resources as they need them. I will say one thing as well along these lines. In terms of the great RFI response that the team here put in, we actually followed all 5 of those recommendations. I really do think you'll see in the NOFO, particularly with our ability to build and fund capacity. And this is really meant to focus on places that we just, as a country, have not invested in, that we have simply not done right by. And some of this is, as we're talking about today, rural, remote areas, tribal regions, but it also could include highly distressed pockets of poverty in urban areas as well. And this leads to our fifth sort of principle around equity and geographic diversity. Equity is EDA's #1 investment priority, and you will see it in this program. We are committed to this. That means we anticipate to have many new applicants, folks that have never received an EDA award before. That is perfectly appropriate. We foresee many regions of the country that may have never received very few competitive awards in the federal government in general. That is totally appropriate. We really are trying to drive a program that hits at distress and the communities that need it. I'll just say quickly, this is a true pilot program. We were authorized by Congress for $1 billion, and we were appropriated in this first round $200 million, and we fully intend to use this to build out and prove out this model so that in the future we can continue to run this program. So let me jump into the sort of the meat of the NOFO and how we're thinking about evaluation. So first, eligible recipients. This shouldn't be anything new. This is basically anything but the private sector. So this is a very common list of types of applicant types that EDA that statutory allowed to fund. I will say we have no preference between individual applicants and coalitions. We expect to get both. That's completely up to the applicant's decision. We don't have a bias one way or the other. We simply ask that the applicants bring the partnerships that are most necessary to see the program successful. Annie highlighted our eligibility map. Please do go visit this map. We've been updating it even since maybe some of the team here have looked at it. There's a lot of complexity in this statute, but we really try to use this map to make it clear, if you're colored in this map, if your region or area is colored, you are eligible. But please do reach out to our team if you have any questions. We want to make this a simple and easy process. So in terms of program structure, we're going to be running a 2-phase program. We just, as of today, kicked off phase 1. This will run through October 5th. I'll talk a little bit about the components of that in a second. We will then announce those that have been, their recompete plans have been approved and will be invited to apply for phase 2, which will launch this winter. And that will ultimately conclude in 4 to 8 regions winning between 20 and 50 million dollars. And I should say we anticipate, and in the NOFO we say we will approve at least 20 recompete plans in that phase one. And I'll unpack this in a second. So in this first phase, there's basically 3 different lanes an applicant can choose to take. One is to apply only for a strategy development grant. Strategy development grant is between 250 and 500,000, up to, in rare cases, 750,000. And that's really for those that want to use these dollars to plan, and they may not be ready or interested in throwing their hat in the ring for those large implementation dollars. If that sounds like a community you serve or in, that's what sort of lane 1 is for. Lane 2 is those that only want to apply to have their recompete plan approved. And so that means they are not applying for a planning grant. They just want to throw their hat in the ring for access to those large implementation dollars. And then I imagine in a large number of cases, applicants will do both. They'll both want to apply for a planning grant and for their recompete plan to be approved. I should say there's no strategy here. There's no one way is better than the other. These will be sort of evaluated in parallel. So we just ask communities, pick the lane that makes the most sense to you. Don't overthink it. There's not sort of a gaming that can be played here. Just pick the one that makes sense and then put forth your application. So here's a couple of the things that I really wanted to dig into quickly here today, and these are the evaluation criteria. And we spent a lot of time thinking about these, and I want to talk about not just what they are, but why these are our evaluation criteria and what we're really expecting from applicants. So this is the evaluation criteria for those planning grants. So, we try to keep it pretty simple. 4 criteria, 15 points each. The first is a question around regional conditions and assessment. And essentially, what are the ideas? This really is, what does the applicant think about their region? What do they think about their community? What's the underlying conditions that need to be addressed in order to address joblessness? And how are those the proposed interventions going to solve these problems? So it's kind of like, what is the plan? What's the quality of the ideas? Number 2 is simply, how are you going to use the strategy development grant? What are the activities you're going to pursue? And do we think those are meritful such that they will help this community be in a place down the road where they might be in a position to access implementation dollars? Third, organizational and leadership capacity. We really just want to know what's the team look like, what's the structure, and what do they have the capacity to execute on these planning grants and begin to build that pathway towards those large implementation dollars. Again, we're planning and hoping that this will be a multi-year funded competition. So we're trying to get as many communities in a place where they can access those implementation dollars in the future. And then finally, just the structure and scope of the budget. So we're hoping this is pretty cut and dry for these planning dollars. So now I want to turn to the recompete plans. So just as a reminder, there's what the recompete plans are, is this is the gateway to get into the second phase and access and compete to access those large implementation dollars. So there's no funding associated with having a recompete plan approved, though we do expect many approved plans will also receive planning grants. But I want to walk through these 6 criteria. You'll see 3 of them are worth 15 points, 3 of them are worth 9. Obviously, relatively speaking, the 15-point ones are of greater interest, but all 6 are critical. The first, and I should say, please do look at the NOFO. We've spent a lot of time unpacking a pretty significant paragraph in each one of these, where we really wanted to make it clear what we were looking at and thinking about, and we didn't want to hide the ball here. We wanted folks to understand what we were looking for. So the first one is really around understanding regional conditions and needs. Again, this is really about what are the underlying conditions. Do you understand and do you have a theory of the case about what your community needs? What are the issues it faces from an economic development perspective? And how do you understand those nuances in your community? And the second piece is, well, what are you going to do about it? Right? What are the strength of your strategies? How are the multiple projects you might be bringing in and those you want EDA to invest in? How do they blend and braid together such that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts? So this really is the quality of your strategy. The third, equity, inclusion, and diversity is, as I mentioned at the top, the EDA is the #1 investment criteria. look, this is about who benefits. This is about who are the community members, who are the types of places that really benefit from this activity, and who are the leadership team? Do they reflect the communities that you're trying to serve? And I want to just make a point here that I made it a little bit earlier. In order to meet this diversity and equity priority, we totally recognize that we may have new grantees that have never worked with EDA before, and I think that is often a good thing. That reflects that we are opening this new program to new communities and new organizations. Fourth is regional assets, and this is really important to me because we really do take an assets-based approach to this competition. We think all communities have assets. Sometimes they're not in many of the communities for this program. They may not be financial assets, but they may be community leadership. They may be faith-based groups. They may be other types of organizations. They may be local government or others. And so we really want people to talk about what they're bringing to this and how they're thinking about this. Number 5 is really about the targeted geography. And this is really like, what is the service area? What is the physical footprint of our investments, and why is that the right physical footprint? We fully expect many applicants to not be serving the full eligible area. Those might be hundreds of square miles, though it could, that's potentially possible too. But here we want applicants to explain to us, where are those benefits occurring and for whom? So the targeted geography. And finally is partnerships and potential commitments. And here we just simply want to hear about who's part of the team, right? Who's part of the team, who's bringing things to the table, who's providing resources and being supportive. I should say there's no match requirement in this competition. Of course, to the extent there's resources available in the community. And I should say many distressed communities exist within states that currently have significant surpluses. So we want to kind of give applicants a license to go hunting, but we recognize different communities have different capabilities of doing so. But we really wanted to think about who's coming to the table. I will say one thing about all of this process. We want to keep it simple and not as difficult as possible. So it really is, when it comes to like letters of support and partnerships, it really is quality over quantity. Don't feel the need to give us 100 letters of support that are fairly generic. Like, give us the 15 that really matter. Give us the ones, the 20, the 11, whatever it is. Like, this is not a bean counting exercise for us. We want to know and get a genuine sense of who you're serving and why. So that really, I think I just right at time, but we also, EDA, please do check out our website. We're going to be adding a lot of supplemental material over the coming weeks and months to really help applicants. But we've created significant checklists. We're going to be posting webinars. We want to make this program as accessible and achievable as possible for the communities we're trying to serve. So please do check that. And if you do have any questions, please do reach out to recompete@eda.gov. That is not sort of a nameless government website. There's like an entire team that checks it every single day. Things roll up to me and the other leadership team members. And so that is a live and living email address that we do answer questions to, and they do filter to our FAQs. But with that, let me pause, stop sharing screens, and I think, am I turning it back over to you, Chris?
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott. Really appreciate that. And I know it's sort of, we planned this in some ways to try to get it out ahead at least. And then of course, the NOFO being released literally an hour before is both kind of a challenge to digest it, but also a great opportunity to kick this off. So we really appreciate the time and information. A couple things before we go. We're going to go to a panelist group of practitioners just to talk a little bit about some of the basic process of what it means to kind of pull a coalition together and in this process. But a couple things I just wanted to touch on. One, will you be able to share the PowerPoint with us so that we can share it with folks, or what's the process with the PowerPoint itself?
Yep. Can you still hear me? I lost.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yes, absolutely. We can share it. We'll also be posting it on the website, a slightly more extended version, I believe, on right after the holiday. But yes, we will absolutely share it. No doubt.
And we will be, to the folks on the call, we've got about 250 or so folks on the call. We will be sharing, again, the links to the NOFO that just came out. I think there were 2 different links that I think are really helpful to look at. What the second question was, and I think it may be if this info that you have on the slide right now, a lot of folks are going to have questions about eligibility, and we don't really want to do that in the Q&A with 250 people. Everybody can't ask their individual. But what is the best way for people to contact EDA for eligibility or investment priorities or discussions about sort of how their community fits or doesn't fit in the formula?
Yep, there's basically two routes. Both are equally appropriate. Either write them to that recompetes at eda.gov. You will get a response, I promise. That, or reach out to your regional office. We've trained up all the regional offices. They're very familiar with the program. If people need help walking through the map, if there's broadband issues, if there's other issues, we've thought about all of these things. Please do reach out. I mean, we literally have had regional offices that have printed off maps for places and like sent them to them. So whatever the situation is, reach out to us. We will help you with eligibility and other features in the notebook.
Great. So we are gonna do another sort of audio more. We're trying to look at the questions coming through Q&A. But we're going to shift now to a panel of practitioners just to talk through a little bit about some lessons learned about their pulling together applications and some advice. And let me get my screen shifted here. Sorry, I am operating out of someone else's office as well. So thanks. So I've got three folks we really appreciate who are going to spend some time with us. Karen Affeld. Karen, as the Executive Director of the North Olympic Development Council in Northwest Washington State, and has over 25 years experience in rural development fundraising and nonprofit administration in natural resource-based communities. Michelle Novak is a community leader who leads the People's Initiative Network. She helped build economic power in the Black community of Middletown, Ohio, by providing networking and economic development opportunities, including initiating a collaborative community-wide federal grant proposal process to support the development of a business incubator, and has over 20 years experience as a grant writer, currently serving as manager for foundations and grants at Dayton Live, sorry. And Rose Riza is the Executive Director of the University of New Mexico Tahoe's Hive, a co-working space and small business support center with on-site UNM Tahoe's classes. Under her leadership, the Hive worked with partners to secure funding to create many new programs and was awarded $1.4 million recently in Venture Challenge Grant from EDA to support its efforts to engage in historically underrepresented members of the tech community. So thank you all so much for being with us today. So we want to try to, well, obviously we have some compressed time, so I'm going to ask each of you to talk maybe 3 or 4 minutes about this question of talk about the process you went through in bringing your community together to do an application. What was it like, and what were the benefits even if you didn't get the grant? So Michelle, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I am happy to share my experience trying to work through this process. The process has changed over the years. I've noticed that the government system for applying for grants has become more streamlined and gotten easier, because I used to tell people just stay away because if you don't have enough funding behind your organization to begin with, it's really hard to go through that process. So I've worked in the bigger cities in the area for nonprofit organizations where I have been able to go through that process. But when it comes to rural communities, we just don't seem to have the resources to do it. So I live in Middletown, population about 50,000, old steel town. We lost a lot of jobs. Economy is not doing great, and a lot of people are leaving the community. So we wanted to pull people together to apply for a USDA grant to help build a business incubator. In my work in the community, I had seen that there had been a lot of disconnect in that process to start a business and scale up your business. And so in my experience, it seemed like it was a logical fit for our community. So I thought about first my strategy, and in building a business incubator, what organization should I get involved? We got the city involved. We started with one-to-one meetings with city officials, just to tell them about the project, what we're thinking, get their ideas, career tech, small business development center. Like, we just thought about who would be the logical players to be involved, who's already doing the work, and also who are the naysayers in the community that might not like what we're doing, but they should be at the table because we need their buy-in. We really didn't want people, it's small communities, people talk. We needed public opinion to be on our side. So I started by having one-to-ones with people, and then we pulled together a group of about 15 individuals from the different organizations. I forgot to mention Miami University because it's good to have a university supporting what you're doing. In those one-to-ones though, we talked about what their priorities are and what they wanted to see, because every organization has their own goals and what they're trying to achieve. So even like with Miami University, they had a campus in Middletown, like a satellite campus, and they needed more student housing. So would it be possible to fit a student housing proposal in with a business incubator? Does it fit? And so as we went around and talked to all the different groups, we saw what made sense and what didn't. We pulled everybody together, and it was really just a dreaming session. Like, what would you like to see happen with this? And that helped to get everybody excited about it, on the same page, to see that we have similar goals. We want to see the same things happening. And after that, we went ahead and actually what we found out in that process was that the USDA grant was for communities that were under 50,000. The new census came out and put us just over that. So we ended up not being able to apply for that grant, but we still wanted to put together a proposal. Timeline changed because we found that we could apply for the congressionally directed spending. So we had to go with that, but it didn't work out for us, unfortunately. I think I can talk about later, like why. we needed a lot more time for the city to pass a resolution, and to get on board, they needed about 6 weeks of lead time, and we didn't have that. So
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll come back on that, because
Okay.
I think it's still good to touch base on sort of what that process meant, even though it didn't work at that particular time. Karen, I was going to come to you next about sort of your experience in pulling folks together for an application, what it was like. Again, sort of, obviously shorthanding it a little bit, but also what were the benefits for that work?
Sure. So my organization is a regional economic development district for 2 counties on the North Olympic Peninsula in Northwest Washington State. It's a very rural area. The largest city, Port Angeles, has around 20,000, about 110,000 in the whole very large 2-county area. And we have 7 federally recognized tribes that either have reservation or trust lands or usual and accustomed usage within the 2-county area. Lots of small communities. And so when we look at an opportunity, first of all, we're a really small organization. And so if anything is going to get done, it's going to be through collaboration and through partnerships. And that's true for a lot of the organizations and local governments in our area, that if they try to go for something alone, the capacity just isn't there. And so it is really important to do coalition building. So our process generally looks like we're going to send out a far and wide notice that there's this funding opportunity, who might be interested in working on it. Everybody's email boxes are full. So we also are going to be thinking about, who really needs to be around the table and who has low capacity, but we really need their involvement and engagement in this. And so then, as Michelle talked about, it's a matter of us going to them. So, rather than saying, hey, we're having a meeting, everybody come, let's talk about this. It's recognizing that trust building and engagement, especially where there may not be capacity, is about going to different communities and really taking a listening role. What are your needs? What are your interests? Do you see any opportunities here? And going in without assumptions necessarily. certainly there's a core of an idea about how you think the funding could be used, but being really open to shifting that concept and to accommodate new things that get learned from new communities. And so then there's a convening process and also a process to figure out who's the best lead applicant. Oftentimes it's not us, it may be someone else. Sometimes it is us. We stand as kind of the applicant of last resort, we call ourselves. And also we will just help and coach to try to create additional capacity. So that's kind of what our process looks like. And we've had grants from USDA, from EDA, from the Puget Sound Partnership, which is the EPA dollars, and we're partners in a DOE application grant as well. Sometimes we don't get the funding. And, we put together a grant to USDA's RISE program, Rural Innovation Strong Economies. A lot of work went into that. That work engaged the local community college, the Northwest School of Wood and Boat Building, both of our ports, the Port Townsend Marine Trades Association, a number of marine trades employers. It was a pretty large coalition when you looked at everybody who was involved. And we met multiple times and really banged out a blue economy strategy for the region. And it did not get funded. But since then, EDA funding has gone to the Northwest School of Wood and Boat Building for a piece of what we had envisioned there. Both ports have gotten funding for pieces of what we were envisioning. Peninsula College has moved forward with broadening their maritime education program. And we're looking at another grant. We're working on another potential proposal together.
That's
right
great.
now.
Thank you.
So that is, to me, that's what comes out of it. And I know my time is short, but the one other thing that I would say is that a big shift that's happening in federal grants right now is a lot more emphasis on, and I think this is a really good thing, on equity and justice, on thinking about climate and environment, even in agencies where that has not previously been part of the grant picture or the criteria. And that is a real opportunity in rural areas to take a step back and not just work with the people that we usually work with, but to really think broadly about who should be engaged and how we can all work together to move forward. So
yeah, thank you. Rose, your work, I know Michelle mentioned, sort of noted the anchor institution of Miami University in Ohio, and you all, your Hive project was sort of had that connection to University of New Mexico Taos. Talk a little bit about how you all pulled your folks together and sort of what you learned from that. What were the story, I guess, from that experience?
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm Rose Reza. I'm the executive director of UNM Taos Hive, which is the hub of internet-based vocation and education. It is one of their very first co-work, business support, and educational programming all under one roof. We really are focused at getting our community digitally skilled and access to living wage jobs. But thank you both, Karen and Michelle. It's so important to, number one, as you are in your community, the Hive came from a grassroots initiative. That's how the idea of needing this type of facility came about. And so through that work, the Hive began to develop. And it is a private-public partnership between Kit Carson Electric Cooperative, UNM Taos, and the Taos Community Foundation. So they are our core partners. We are very lucky because Kit Carson is probably one of the most progressive with fiber and solar, and they're really, we're 100% daytime solar in Taos and in Cuesta, and it's just, the foundation is there, but the opportunity, how do you get your communities access and training so they can leverage those resources that do exist. But I would say, like both Karen and Michelle mentioned, you need to ask yourself as you go into this grant application, who are your stakeholders, right? who is, and in our case, from the very beginning, we were networking with SBDC, with Main Street, with the Chamber, with the town of Taos, with the county of Taos, constantly networking and developing relationships. And that is going to be the strength of your application. That is going to be the strength for your organization. Because as everyone knows, we cannot do this work alone. It takes an army, especially in rural America. And so I would say, really ensure that you're sharing your goals. And regarding this grant that you all are looking at, that age group of 25 to 40, finding them work, what does that look like? Who you have to take the time to grassroots with them. You have to bring them together. Why aren't they wanting that? What are the barriers? Here in rural America, in our community, there's transportation issues. Right now, we're dealing with food insecurity. It is huge in rural America, and it is. Right now I'm working with programming with youth this summer, and I think to all of our EDA representatives, we need to start earlier, really focusing on how to engage all the populations into being well-prepared citizens as they get older and as they get into this age group that we're focusing on right now. But it's really important that you have a strategy. And at this time, I know the NOFO dropped already, but it's, who are your partners? What gaps have they identified with? Have you met with some of the largest manufacturers? Have you met with some of the largest institutions to understanding what their struggles are? Because I would tell you, break it into pieces. We cannot be everything to everyone. I know when we went and applied, we actually got 2 grants. We got the EDA Built to Scale, and we were awarded from the Department of Energy a 5-year grant, but focusing on the educational piece of the Hive. But you have to break it down. You cannot be all things to everyone. And I always say less is more. So if you can prioritize exactly the top 3 priority opportunities you're faced with the top 3 solutions to bridge this gap, I would definitely make sure that you to keep you on target. The Hive's core pillars are education, entrepreneurship, engagement. And from those 3 core pillars, we grow all of our programming. Education for youth, for adults, right? And then we start building with that. Entrepreneurship for tech, and there are just those beginners. But again, what are you going to do? What are your core pillars that you're, that you are grounded on? And how are you going to collaborate on identifying the gaps with the stakeholders and core partners that are going to support you on this initiative? It's important as a group, define your region's opportunities and solutions. And again, I always say less is more. You get more done.
Thanks so much, Rose. We've been trying to sort of follow Q&A in the chat, and I know really appreciate the EDA folks chiming in with a lot of questions. I wanted to give you each sort of a kind of a lightning round question for a quick response, which is, what advice, you've talked about this in general, but if you had to boil down like a quick piece of advice for folks who are in rural regions, who are thinking about pulling together people for this Recompete opportunity, what would you be able to say to them in a pretty short and sweet way? I'll start with you, Michelle.
Yeah, well, I think we all touched on the importance of relationships. So always value those relationships. They are your greatest resource. And have a good timeline. And then when you're talking to people, keep your mission at the forefront. Being mission focused really draws people together and helps people to get beyond those old disagreements that we see in a lot of rural communities that tend to come to the forefront sometimes. So just stay focused on the mission, the future, where you're headed.
Great, thank you. Karen, it's similar to you, but I think also someone wanted a specific question about how long has it taken to bring your groups together and thinking about that process? Because you've talked about two different sort of scenarios, and just I think both that quick advice, but also is there a, how long does this take? I view it myself as like this is kind of ongoing work that you want to be doing in communities, and so that's part of the reason why we wanted to feature you all today, is that we think there's real benefit to doing this work, as you noted, even outside of just an application, but maybe you could touch on that. And I'll come to you, Rose, next with that same question.
Yeah, so I think that for this particular opportunity, I think that it's going to be important to kind of focus on some of those key questions that are in the guidelines as a way to shape the discussion. Really understanding what are our assets and what are the gaps that we're trying to fill, and then you can work towards how do we get there from here? What does our plan look like? And structure the discussion in such a way that you can take in a lot of ideas and incorporate as many as makes sense, but really stay focused on kind of how are we gonna address those major gaps and barriers in order to succeed. And in terms of the length of time, so I've been in this job in this community 6.5 years, and when I took the job, I think we had 8 members of the organization, maybe 10. We have 37 members today, and that's been a time of just working with people, networking, and we do a monthly convening where everybody comes together. It's not just open to members, lots of non-members come, and there's a presentation on some topic of interest, but a lot of the time is spent with a go-round where everybody has a couple minutes to just talk about what am I working on and what help could I use. And so new connections form out of that. Now, not everybody has the capacity to do that, although I have to say, this is a very low labor meeting that we put together, just finding a speaker. We do it virtually. It is not a huge effort to do it, but that helps keep things connected. We also end up working with a lot of the same partners over and over again. So, working on comprehensive economic development strategy, working on regional climate change adaptation, working on renewable energy, working on disaster resilience, working on broadband. The particular players may be different, but there's just tremendous overlap. In a rural area, there are only so many people who can work on issues, and so we end up collaborating with the same partners over and over again. Some of them we get along really great and we're in complete alignment on direction and everything. Others, there's just a piece where we're working on this together and we may not really agree in terms of overall approach, but that's okay because we can work on this piece together. And I think that's really important too. So
thanks so much. Rose, coming to you with the same sort of piece of advice, and I think if you have some context of the length of time in that work too, that's great.
Great. Relationship building is every day. And it starts from the very beginning. And it constantly has to be nourished, right? Just, shaking somebody's hand one day isn't just making a connection. It has to be consistent. And we work on that every day. And it's key to the work you're going to do in your rural community. So we can never estimate how important that is. As far as what I would do, I would hire a grant writer. And if you and I read, and it's not all of you have access to a grant writer, so I don't know if there's going to be any kind of technical assistance for these communities that want to write. But I know that's a real challenge for rural communities. What we did as an organization, we actually during the middle of the pandemic is when we opened during the pandemic, and we put on a grant writing class, virtual, 26, 28. It was so good that UNM took it and made it one of their classes, but it's took it away from me. No, but that's real challenge. And I want to say to everybody here, the grant writer is not responsible for telling your story. The grant writer takes your opportunities, solutions, gaps, everything you've done, your homework, and puts it into a story. And I think a lot of times we just say, okay, we want to do this. Here you go, grant writer. And we cannot do that. They're to help us get it in the format, help us with aligning the budget. But their job is not to tell the story. So that's something I would tell all of you, really work on. What is your story? What is your narrative that you're looking to change? And the other, I think it's what helped us when we went through the build to scale is defining those roles, right? If you have 3 or 4, or I mean, in our case, we had 3 individuals. They were always on we always got together once a week, whatever it took, but everyone understood what they were responsible for in the grant, what they're going to work on. And like Michelle mentioned, what does that timeline, what does that look like? You have to really, because the clock's ticking. The no phone dropped today, so the clock is ticking. And the sooner you can understand who's going to be involved, what is their role going to be, and the timeline associated with each of the deliverables, the more successful you're going to be getting your grant submitted on time.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate you all being here and sharing your wisdom and experience. And I know we at CSG look forward to connecting with you all more on your work. Really big thanks to Scott and his team at EDA for being here on the day that the NOFA dropped and jumping into the chat to answer a lot of questions. I think just to reinforce a couple things that I heard you all say that is really important. There's real benefits to organizing people around these kind of grant opportunities beyond just the funding, and that work is ongoing, that you really need to do that work to bring folks to the table so that it's not just seen as like, I'm only interested in working together if there's funding, because there is a lot of unseen work that happens when communities are coming together and sort of building trust, I think, as a number of you talked about, in that ongoing way. Another thing was just making sure that the target population is included in the listening and planning is, again, oftentimes, I think in rural places, we have a sort of deficit framework of, we know what our problems are, we know what to do, we're just going to go do it, without really understanding the assets, strengths, and needs of the community in a that may be slightly different. And people, you really want that sense of local ownership so that the project will really be successful. There's a long history of investments in rural places that were sort of top down and didn't have the kind of impact, or certainly from an equitable lens, that kind of impact. And I really appreciate you all highlighting that. And I think this notion of finding ways to find connection, I think, Karen, you particularly highlighted that there are some people you'll have more alignment with than others. And that is really typical, I think, in everybody we talk to does that work. And I know Michelle and Rose have that in their work as well. And that both goes a long way to showing that the full community, this isn't just one segment of the community, but we've really brought a lot of different voices to the table. And as you build those relationships and build trust, there may be the ability to find some more alignment. That sometimes difficulty in working with folks is because they don't always know each other as well as they need to, or where those deeper alignments may lay. So we thank everybody. We had probably 500 folks register. We had nearly 300 folks on the call. We still got close to 200 folks on the call. And as we said, we'll be sharing resources and links through our website. And I know other national rural organizations will be working together to get this information out to the field. And we look forward to connecting with all of you more as we try to help rural places take advantage of this unique funding opportunity. So thanks everybody for your time.